And who is going to be the boogeyman of the next 10 to 20 years? Who's going to be the great rival to the United States in the eyes of American society? China, that's right. And so what do you think the attitude is going to be over time for the shrinking, insecure white majority that's losing their jobs for, let's say, Chinese Americans or Asian Americans? I personally, I said to a group at Harvard, I think we're one generation away from falling into the same camps as the Jews who were attacked in the synagogue in Pittsburgh, just a couple months ago. It's like we're probably one generation away from Americans shooting up a bunch of Asians saying damn the Chinese because there's a giant Cold War or even more with China. That is the great danger that I fear that my children are going to grow up in.
All right, so Andrew Yang, the big proponent who's been in the news recently, advocating for UBI, Medicare for all, plenty of other entitlements that'll end up the same way all the rest of them do, usually broken, over budget, don't reach the goal they were intended to, and despite failing, they'll continually be expanded by the government, simply pouring more money into that leaky bucket. But that's not what this video is about. This video is about the video you just saw. It's a bit nutty, and it was interesting to see some of the comments because I agreed with a lot of them. Not that I support Yang in the slightest, but a lot of people were expressing the same thought that I had, which was that Yang seemed like a reasonable guy at the very least. Yes, I disagree with him on a whole host of issues, but it seemed like from the interviews I have seen with him, which admittedly were not very numerous, it was a bit here and a bit there, but he seemed to have his head screwed on tight at the very least. But then I saw the clip that you saw at the beginning of this video, and that just went out the window. Now, one thing to note, some people were not entirely listening to what he said, and they were claiming that he was worried about Asians being thrown into camps. If you listen, perhaps the word camps was a bad choice, but what he was really saying that Asians will eventually be in the same camp as other minority groups who have been the target of some insane gunman. He meant it in the same way you might say libertarians and classical liberals are kind of in the same camp. That's the vibe he was saying that sentence in. But that being said, this is still just so obviously a ploy to get that victimhood status. Unfortunately, or rather fortunately for Asian Americans, by being Asian, you don't really get that sought-after status of victimhood. Because frankly, Asians typically do very well in the US. Every metric that social justice warriors use to impart victimhood status to people doesn't seem to suggest that Asians are oppressed in any way. You would think that's a good thing, but of course it isn't anymore. Being oppressed means that you get social capital. Or more accurately, being able to make it seem as if you're oppressed will get you that social capital. Well, that's tough for Asian Americans because they do so well, whether it's incarceration rates, arrest rates, conviction rates, the amount of money they make, their level of education. Asian Americans are on the better side of all of those bell curves. They beat out white people in almost all of them. And it seems that Andrew Yang here knows this, and this is his best shot at trying to get in on that victimhood status. If you can get that, that might bode well for your campaign. There's a lot of political and social capital to be mined out of achieving an oppressed status. Unfortunately, that means he has to make thinly veiled attacks on Caucasians, as if today we're some insane group that would murder people based over racial differences. It's the same rhetoric that attempts to give this impression that the US suffers from an epidemic of murderous white people. There's 325 million people in the United States. A few terrible incidents don't constitute a racial apocalypse in my opinion. As terrible as those incidents are, and as evil as those perpetrators may be, we are not a violently racist country. And I don't like how Andrew Yang is prodding that idea with a stick to try and get that social justice support. But that's it for now. Please like and subscribe because it's so freaking nice of you. But that's all. See you later.